On a rather challenging day, when the positions from both sides, India and Pakistan, seems to be stiffening further, we are joined at NDTV by two international experts who have seen India-Pakistan relationship, particularly India, from a global prism. Ms. Lisa Curtis and Mr. Richard Rossow. Lisa, to you first. Where do you see all of this moving? In which direction? This seems to be fraught now. And the question that would be playing on the top of all minds that are vested in this, including some of the Western minds like yours, would be, where is all this headed?
Well, I think this is a very alarming situation, the worst terrorist attack in Kashmir since the 2019 crisis. But this one, very brutal, attacking tourists, mainly, Hindu tourists that were in the area. And so I think this is an alarming situation. India has showed already that it's ready to respond. It's ready to act. It's already expelled Pakistan embassy staff. It's closed the borders, expelling Pakistani nationals from the country, and it has suspended the Indus Water Treaty. So India has reacted very swiftly. But I don't think this will be the end of the Indian response. I think there's a lot of suspicions of a Pakistani hand. I think the timing of it is suspect. The fact that Vice President Vance is in the country, the fact that these tourists were systematically targeted, showing a ruthlessness that we don't see generally from local Kashmiri militants. And the fact that the Chief of Army Staff, Asim Munir, just last week made very provocative statements about Kashmir. So I think the Indian establishment is placing the blame on Pakistan, and this has, alarming implications for the region, given that, we have two nuclear-armed states. We've seen many crises in the past escalate. And so, hopefully the U.S. will get involved and try to calm tensions.
Alarming situation, Mr. Rossow. And the fact that, this, whenever we talk about India, Pakistan, this binary of the nuclear armed states or nuclear, powers comes into play. But I do not think at this point in time, anybody in India, at least, as far as the sense that I get when I speak to the establishment, is willing to respect any kind of nuclear binary here. And I agree partly with Lisa's summation of the situation that this is certainly not going to be the end of the Indian response. What do you think? I mean, in that sense, a threshold has been breached, right?
Yeah, but unfortunately, it is a situation that India has dealt with pretty consistently across the many decades now. And I think, Lisa correctly laid out what we've seen. India, Pakistan have playbooks for the way that non-military steps that they can take on the heels of a crisis like this. But then you move into the area of uncertainty. I think we've seen successive U.S. administrations that have given India more of a free hand, not that it's ours to give, but not condemning India for initiating, modest but successful counterattacks against Pakistan, attacking terror bases across the line of control. And so I think India feels a little bit more freedom, especially wanting to maintain, I think, what has been a pretty good rise in U.S.-India relations, that for India to take steps of its own accord militarily that won't see necessarily the United States withdrawing. And President Trump, and Lisa, of course, knows this better than I do, has no love for Pakistan. So I think for India to take the fight across the border, initiate attacks as they've done the last couple of times, you had significant attacks, I wouldn't be surprised. But then, again, you're moving into the area of uncertainty. We've seen major troop mobilizations in times past, things like that, threats of war, times where war has actually taken place. But so far, I've been around Washington the last couple of days for the World Bank IMF meetings and business community meetings, and you don't yet feel that sense of frenzy. Should we be moving citizens, things like that. So so far, I think on this side of the aisle, things are relatively calm, and just, of course, praying for India and hoping that things get resolved in a favorable way sooner rather than later.
And Lisa, you have been actively associated with at least the first Trump administration. the volatility in this US administration, that is Mr. Trump's administration, has always been higher than a regular, if one were to put it like that, regular kind of a US administration. However, quite clearly, Mr. Trump has made his position very, very clear when it comes to terror attacks, particularly state-sponsored cross-border terror attacks. Do you think that India has that additional leeway available and an explicit sort of support from the Trump administration, particularly in keeping in mind that the American vice president was on Indian soil when this brutal, dastardly attack took place?
Well, I think you are going to see strong support for India from the second Trump administration. Already they've signaled how important India is to the United States. We've already seen a visit between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump, the vice president going to India just this week. So you'll see strong support for India. However, I think it's a complicated situation, and nobody wants to see a full-blown military crisis or even conflict, which could happen as if they go up the escalation ladder. So I think you'll see publicly very strong support for India, a lot of sympathy for India, and probably some condemnation of Pakistan. It has harbored terrorists in the past, has had a role in other terrorist attacks in India. I don't know the facts of what's happening, but I've laid out why the Indians are likely suspicious of a Pakistan hand. But at the same time, the U.S. has always played a role of reducing tensions, calming down crises in the region. And my hope is that the U.S. plays the same role this time around. But I'm a little bit nervous about that because there are so many distractions across the world right now. There are so many conflicts in Russia, the Middle East, and the U.S. has its hands full right now. And frankly, this second Trump administration has not shown that it's very organized yet. It's still in the first 100 days, or we just surpassed the first 100 days. So my concern is that there may not be the same kind of diplomatic organization that we've seen the U.S. play in the past. Even in the 2019 crisis, Secretary of State Pompeo, former Secretary of State Pompeo, played a very important role in working the phones, talking to both sides, ensuring that that crisis was de-escalated. And to mention that previous crisis, the two sides got lucky in that the Indian pilot survived after the dogfight between the Indian and Pakistani fighter jets, and was then used to de-escalate the overall crisis. We don't know if there would be such an opportunity this time around. So I think we're in very dicey territory, very dangerous territory, and the U.S. has to walk this line of showing support for India, condemning Pakistan for its past support to terrorism, but then counseling military restraint. Nobody wants to see conflict break out in this region.
Richard, too many conflicts on the global plate currently, and that is why probably Pakistanis thought that this is an opportune moment for carrying out this kind of strike. Indian establishment obviously has no doubt in their mind that there is an active Pakistani hand behind this, that there is an absolutely direct connection to the Pakistani establishment, to the people who have actually carried out, and this is actually a state-sponsored attack. Indian establishment is absolutely in no doubt on that proposition, and they are mincing no words. They have directly, actively blamed Pakistani establishment, not non-state actors, not terror groups, not terrorists. They have blamed the Pakistani establishment for this kind of blatant, brazen, dastardly terror attack on complete innocents. People who have absolutely nothing to do with any kind of conflict, the bogey that Pakistan continues to raise between India and Pakistan. Therefore, an attack on complete innocents. Will Pakistan get away in the eyes of the International Committee of Nations just because there are too many conflicts, or the world has the stomach for India to take some sort of a military route past this, or military escalation past this?
I don't think many in the world are terribly surprised that, to say the very least, Pakistan turns a blind eye to terror organizations, and plenty of material that shows that they do, offer real support as well. So are we going to turn a blind eye? No, I think most of the global community has largely abandoned Pakistan because of consistency in what we see right now. You don't see a lot of investment coming in from countries. You don't see a lot of development aid coming in, barring China and other countries that would cozy up to almost anybody that, is kind of against maybe the Western global system. So, in that sense, maybe the world has less levers, just because we can't talk about withdrawing support from Pakistan, because that had already been done, because we know that Pakistan has at least condoned. Sorry? So I don't think that this is going to change the way the rest of the world looks at Pakistan, the way that we treat Pakistan. Luckily, India, as the larger, more powerful partner, we will put full support behind India. We'll trust India to kind of take the appropriate measures. But as Lisa hinted, we don't want to see an overreach, and India doesn't want to either. This is a moment when India can begin luring a lot of investment that's looking to peel away from China, potential for a trade agreement with the United States. So India's got a lot at stake right now for stability. That'll also help the homeland in terms of creating jobs and revitalizing the economy. So distraction, the word's been used a couple of times. India would like to have a measured, appropriate response, but also make sure that they're kind of back on track for a lot of the important engagements they have on the table.
And Lisa, let me go back to your association with the Trump administration and ask you that China question as well, because whenever it comes to India, Pakistan, and potentially a military conflict, China always becomes a player, whether or not they get directly involved, but the shadow always looms large on the horizon, so to say. Do you think that at this point in time, when China is under additional pressure from the Trump administration on tariffs and otherwise also globally, do you think they will take a step back and allow this Indian response to play out without getting directly engaged or involved from the Pakistani side, or their all-weather friendship notwithstanding?
I think that's right. I think China is likely to stay out this time. They were involved to a certain degree during the 2019 crisis, but the relationship was at a different stage. I think right now China does have its hands full dealing with the U.S. and with tariffs. And also China and India have recently embarked on a sort of rapprochement or normalization of the relationship. China had agreed to back down on certain positions along the line of actual control. And so you were starting to see a thaw in India-China relations, which really began about a year ago, but kicked in last October. So I think China will want to stay out and stay neutral at this particular point. So I don't see China really getting very involved in this crisis. Traditionally, China has backed Pakistan and, tried to take a role, pushing India back from retaliating. We certainly saw that in 2019. So I think, we have to wait and see what China's response is, but my sense is that they would hesitate to get too involved this time around. And again, it comes back to that U.S. role. And the U.S. has always been able to play, a role in reducing tensions when they become too high between India and Pakistan. But the question is whether this, second Trump administration can, organize itself and start playing that role. The question is, who's going to be the point person picking up the phone, talking to both sides? Is it going to be Secretary of State Rubio, National Security Advisor Waltz? How does the U.S. get involved in trying to prevent a full-blown conflict in the South Asia region. There are also diplomatic steps. The U.S. can work with India to designate Pakistan-supported terrorists. It can, work with India on a diplomatic approach to put pressure on Pakistan for its support to terrorism. So there are steps that can be taken that could be seen as Indian retaliation, but short of, a major kinetic response.
But Lisa, my sense is that New Delhi is not going to be satisfied with those, what many would call cosmetic steps, designating terror groups, etc., etc. And the kind of language that we have heard from the apex of the political superstructure today in this country, coming from the Prime Minister himself, who prides himself in being a strong leader, is not the language, is not the kind of communication that he's putting out where he or his government would be satisfied with some kind of cosmetic steps. What do you think on that?
Well, I think you have a good point. I think this is a major terrorist attack. There is, high Indian suspicion that there's a Pakistani hand in it. And so there's going to be a lot of public pressure from the Indian public for Prime Minister Modi to respond in a firm way. We also have seen precedent. India responded to the 2019 terrorist attack that killed 40 Indian soldiers in Kashmir by striking at a alleged terror camp, deep in Pakistani territory. So India has already set that precedent for the kind of retaliation it would take. So I think the Indian military and security forces will also be putting that pressure on the Prime Minister to retaliate in some firm way. So, we've yet to see how this plays out. I think in the 2019 situation, India responded about 12 days after the initial attack. So, there may be this period of time where the international community can step in and have a calming impact on the situation and find a way that India can retaliate in a way that doesn't escalate the situation and take us closer to an India-Pakistan all-out war.
Richard, my final question to you before I let both of you go, at least this evening, is this a realistic possibility that India retaliates and post that the situation can de-escalate? Is this a realistic possibility? Because remember, 2019 was first time for Pakistan also when they saw that kind of response that they saw from the Indian side. Prior to that, for a very long time, they were used to carrying out these kind of terror strikes and not get anything paid back in the similar currency. So 2019 was the first time when that Rubicon was crossed, so to say. This is going to be the time number 2 from the Indian side. So is it possible that India reacts and then the situation de-escalates? Or this is currently anybody's guess, as Lisa began by saying this is a very alarming situation?
Well, you did also have the surgical strikes after the 2016 attack. So actually, we've had a couple times now where India's had a more robust response that's less than war. So I wouldn't be surprised at all, if India initiates a counterattack. We've seen it a couple of times now, for them to take out terrorist camps on the other side. But India has also a tremendous stake in seeing some level of stability sooner rather than later. So I think, trying to teach Pakistan a lesson, doing so in a measured way. India is the much larger power, kind of choosing when it's time to dial things back. India has the control and ability to do that. So you can see a pathway forward based on the last couple of times, but sometimes there are unknowns. When bullets are flying, when bombs are dropping, you never know where things might lead. So I can imagine a controlled, measured response we've seen in the recent past, a couple of incidents. But you can't control every possible outcome once munitions begin flowing. So we're going to be watching this extremely closely. Again, here in D.C., a lot of India-focused business community meetings the last couple of days. Everybody recognizing the attack that happened. The finance minister, of course, leaving D.C. early because of that. But I would say so far, at least in the business community, people aren't getting whipped up into a frenzy because they know India also has a major stake in the global economy for creating jobs and such. So So I suspect that there will be a response, but also hopefully we'll get back to status quo and back on good things happening before too long.
So on a very somber, very somber background on a very somber day, we were able to end on that hopeful note that India and Pakistan, or the relations or the conflict, can probably, end on a rather bittersweet note. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Liza Curtis, always ever so erudite, and Mr. Rossow, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah. Thanks.